our topic today is, why can't my people just get with the program? You have to say it that way, right?
Yes.
Love that topic.
And we talked a lot about that last week a little bit, with the clicks and that. But I think where I want to start today is that I think it's a really common feeling for people to have, about like being frustrated, that my people aren't doing, what they are. So it's a very common feeling that we've experienced, and it's a very demoralizing thing, which is I think why it's worth talking about it. But my first question is, what is the program? At the core of what we're doing, what is the program? Because we all have tastes and desires and styles and preferences and ways of doing things. But what is the program that we're calling them to? What is the thing that we as leaders are calling our teams to? And my first thought is like, well, okay, let's back up to the beginning, and it's about the gospel, right? It's about discipleship. It's about creating spaces where people can meet with God. That's our program, specifically as worship people, as worship leaders. Like at a very core level, we are called to just create meeting places where people can encounter the Lord through music, and as church leaders, because we are church leaders, right? As church leaders, we are called to disciple people. We are called to call people to the gospel, call people to live a life of repentance and working out our salvation with fear and trembling, and but it's not a works-based salvation, but it's we were saved by the gift of Christ to do good works. We have that charge, that commission. So I think it's really important to frame. Anytime I'm frustrated with something, I want to go back and say, okay, so what am I called to here? I'm called to make disciples, and what are we called to as a team? We are called to create spaces where people can meet with Jesus. Now, what's getting in the way of that? What this little piece that I'm frustrated with, is it one of those deals? Is it one of those things? It's like, well, yeah, I can't make disciples because my pastor's a jerk. I mean, God forbid that's ever happens in church life.
Never happens.
Never happens. Okay, good. So we don't have to talk about that. Or that I'm sloppy or lazy, and that I'm not really taking care of my own business as a leader, as a musician, as a administrator. So yeah, when I talk about what's the program, what are the first things that come to your minds?
My program.
Yeah.
What I want them to do.
Yep.
To be honest, that's usually what we,
Yeah, no, for sure.
I want to go to the program. It's like, yeah, why won't they do what I've asked them to do? Why won't they cooperate?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah, but you're right. That's not really the program. That shouldn't be the program. Shouldn't be our agenda and our program. I mean, yes, we have to have someone to lead and, kind of take charge and organize things, but
sure.
Yeah. Our program.
I always want people to live up to my expectations. I expect them to do that. And what I always have to recognize, especially with my personality type of wanting everybody to like me, is that I might not even lay out those expectations, because it might put somebody in a spot where they're threatened or they feel like, oh, I can't do that, or I don't want to do that. And so I don't want to impose on them something that they don't want to do, even though I want them to do it. And so it reminds me of something that Coach Andy Martin used to say. It's like, the team will do whatever you let them get away with.
Yeah.
And he said it better than that, but do you know the exact wording on that, Dave? I don't know.
Yeah, it's like, you're complaining, why does my team blah, blah, blah? And he goes, well, you know why? Because you let them.
Yeah.
That's why.
But that makes me feel guilty in a way. Like, it makes me feel like, oh, geez, I'm a bad leader because I don't do that. And it's my my fear of someone not liking me or something. Maybe, like, I'm not saying I don't consciously think that, but I think that's in the back of my mind somehow, that I don't impose on someone something that I think that they don't want to do, because I think that will make them not like me. So that sounds like a personality flaw to me, or a character flaw. I don't know.
Well, it sounds like you should go read Galatians 1:10.
And what does that say? I'm not familiar with that.
Just go look it up.
All right.
I'll give you permission to look it up right now, even as we're talking.
All right. Okay.
I know you can multitask, or at least switch task.
Yes, I can.
And then when you find it, you can read it to us.
All right.
I'm learning to get my kids to interact, so I'm giving them assignments.
For I am now seeking the approval of, for am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. Okay, all right, in my face. Like 15-yard penalty, facial.
First down.
Okay. Automatic first down.
Sorry, that's one of my favorite verses, because I'm on the I have the other plank in my eye, where I'm like, I don't care what you think, kiss my butt, man. I'm just gonna do this thing. That's my default. Like, I have to temper that, but I think everybody does like me. So if they don't, it's because they have a problem, and you can see how that's a problem for me, right?
Yeah, I would have to agree with Kevin in a way that, but it's more of, I don't want to come across as the, Army drill sergeant that's, just bossing them around, telling them what to do, So I think that does fall back on, like you said, Kevin, you want them to like you. It's kind of still the bottom line there.
Yeah. I mean,
and I've had, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And I've had even a team member before say to me, we're just volunteers here. So that still is kind of like in my mind, that should I expect as much of them as I do from myself? Because of that, I feel like I should, but that's still kind of, I hear that in the back of my mind,
Yeah. Yeah. Which, I mean, I have a long-standing disdain for that terminology and that way of thinking, because it's not biblical, I don't think. Like, you're a volunteer in the sense of A, you're not paid, and B, you said yes, you volunteered to do this, but your identity isn't a volunteer, because that's a massive cop-out. You are a disciple, buddy. Like, we're here and we're all disciples. So what are disciples called to? Because I know that in church sometimes people sign up to help because they're gifted, because they're interested, because they want to be up front, any number of reasons. But at the end of the day, I think they need to grow in an understanding that says, God called me to do this. I feel a sense of purpose and calling, that I'm supposed to be here, supposed to be doing this. And if I have that understanding, then I can't hide behind being a volunteer. It's because, but I think a lot of people don't have any sense at all of calling. They have a sense of maybe obligation or interest, or they're just serving out of the goodness of their heart. They're servants, and that's awesome. But how can I because at the core of what I'm doing, my program, the core of my program is discipleship. That's the core of my program. I am leading my I'm leading my team in their relationship with God, and so I have to help them grow in that understanding, and I have to work at discipling them. And so, if you believe that you are a volunteer, and that means that you can't really hold me to anything, because you know what I can do, I can unvolunteer. You know, it's like, okay, then go ahead and do that. Like, so anyway.
I think a lot of times probably team members look at a calling as only on the leader, and not that it's a calling for them necessarily. I mean, they're using their gifts and their talents to serve the Lord. Yes, but I don't know that they would look at their role as being something that they were called to, although you're right, they are.
Yeah.
Going back to just the whole concept of disciple making, one of the things that it's stuck in my head for many years is like a mantra of what's called TNET. It's a disciple making program that you go through, and it takes like 2 years to go through it. Anyway, hey Daryl.
Hola.
Hola. The sort of the slogan is tell them what, tell them why, show them how, and do it with them. So like sometimes our teams don't really know. They might know what to do. You might say, well, this is what I need you to do, but why is it important? And showing them how to do it by our example, and then doing it with them, so that they're not like just told what to do, but not shown, like show and tell kind of, and get people to buy in by joining you in what you're doing, not by being told what to do. So.
Yeah.
What is that again? What?
Tell them what, tell them why, show them how, and do it with them.
Okay.
And then fifthly, send them out. Like basically they take your place when you leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's Hey Tony.
Tony.
Hey.
Bienvenido.
Hola.
That is the core of good leadership, having a vision, knowing where you're going, and having a path to get there. Leaders help your team get over the obstacles and get to a destination together. That's what a leader does. And good leaders, any leader, has to be resourceful. They have to figure out a way to get there. And so a plan like Kevin, like you're outlining, can be really helpful to say, okay, how am I going to walk them there? Like right now, I think it's always important to say it's okay where you are. If you have a team full of volunteers, and even if it's your doing that they're in that place, and maybe you've been frustrated for 10 years with them, but that's where they are, it's okay to be there. Let's just not stay there. Have a vision. Where are you going? What is this that we're calling them to? Our worship team is a disciple making arm of the church, right? And I'm a disciple maker. That's what I do. I replicate disciples. I replicate worshipers. That's my call, and I want to help you get in touch with your call in that.
All right. So if you have like a lot of worship leaders have been where they are for 4 or 5, 10 years, whatever, and they've never done this. They've never established a vision or shown anybody. Like, how do you restart that? Because it's kind of like sharing the gospel with somebody that you've been friends with for 20 years. It's like, why didn't you do this a lot earlier?
Yeah.
I don't know. So the team might say, where's this coming from? Or, what's the deal? So how do you start if you never did it?
COVID. It gives you license to do anything.
The reset.
You're like, hey, you know what? I've been doing a lot of thinking during our time off, and I'm kidding. I mean, that actually could work fine. But that's a great question. because I mean, I really feel that, especially when you talk about your friend of 20 years that you've never shared, Christ with. Like, how do you go there?
I think I love that question. I think you start like anything else. You apologize for not doing it sooner, and say, you know what, I want to develop a culture where we're growing and learning, and sometimes that means, doing awkward things like saying, why haven't we talked about this before? Yeah, I wonder why I haven't. To me, it's no different than, being married for 16 years and saying, you know what, I'm sorry that I haven't communicated better 16 years ago, but I don't want to have another 16 years and be worse. So like, let's both agree that we're in an imperfect thing where we're humans, and let's all go together. I think that vulnerability is actually helpful to others, because you're not all of a sudden coming as from a holier than thou kind of like, we're going to do this. And they're like, whatever, dude, you didn't do it before. You're actually saying, you know what? We're all in this together. Let's be better. And I'm going to share my vulnerability with you. I know that you're vulnerable. Let's move forward. I think that's actually an endearing thing that you could do for your team. I think that's sometimes a problem. The primary problem of leadership is people get a sense that leaders are always perfect and they don't make mistakes and they're 100% functional. And we all know that's just not true. So let's stop perpetuating that thing where I'm the perfect leader and say, by God's grace, let's all grow together.
Yeah. And really, like, people have epiphanies, encounters with God, learnings, like that happens to us all the time. You go to something, you get inspired, you see something from a different perspective, and you come back and you're like, guys, I haven't seen this before, and I'm really sorry, and I want us to go here. Like, you can always start new. That is always an option.
Yeah, there's plenty of.
I think here's where we can get strategic with. Go ahead.
No, you froze,
and
I thought you stopped talking, but you were talking. It's just the computer froze.
That's awesome. I don't remember what I was saying, but I was going to say this. That's okay. Getting strategic with it, though, where a lot of leaders fall down and where they are frustrated with their team, where the team is at and where their team is not going, and where they add frustration to that is in their, like Kevin was saying, their strategy to go there. They don't have any, and they might be the like, oh, here comes Harry with another great idea, and we all know that it's going to last for 2 weeks and then he's going to drop it. Like, you have a track record of not implementing change as well. And so that, like, okay, don't add that frustration to your team. Or maybe you're like super timid and you're like, I want to do this, but for whatever number of reasons, depending on what fader you are, and what Enneagram number you are, and et cetera, you might be really, there's not any believability in when you're sharing your vision or your idea, because you don't believe it yourself, or you're just so not confident generally, or you're just timid, or you're like, I have this idea, but man, I've got like zero, I don't know how to get there. I don't know the next step. I have no idea. And so you need to bring other people in. You need to talk to your pastor. You need to talk to another worship leader. You need to hire a coach. You need to, whatever you need to do. But think, what other things, what other reasons sabotage that moment. So let's say you do have an idea, you do want to take your team somewhere, whether or not you are waking up to a new possibility. What are some pitfalls? What are some ways that you sabotage either yourself or your team? Number one,
Inertia.
It's hard to start. Objects in motion tend to stay in motion. Objects at rest tend to stay at rest. What else?
Did you say, Kevin? What was
Inertia. Right?
it? Time.
What do you mean?
Time. Just like not taking the time to implement what you're wanting to.
Like not sticking to it long enough? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Not knowing what to do, like being confused about what the direction should be.
No plan or no direction. Not even steps. You're like, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you watch the elevation video and you're like, I'm not sure where they're going, but I like it. We should go somewhere similar. I have no idea like what that is. I know Tony would never say that, but
I was thinking like lack of motivation or lack of conviction that, kind of like, what's the use? Or if I step out and suggest this, then I'm going to have to stick to it. And I'm not very good at sticking to things, so I don't want to put myself in that spot.
that's a really good one. And that's a really big one.
That is a big one.
Yeah. Yeah. My fear doesn't stand a chance when
Yeah.
Okay. So that's self-doubt, lack of confidence, looking at your own track record and being like, yeah, I can't go there.
It could be also that we look at it and say, wow, that's just so much work. I'm not up for that. That's not a good place, but it's realistic, I think.
No, I mean, it takes me immediately back to, I was talking to a leader the other day who's just a new leader of the church, and they're like saying this needs to change and this needs to change, and they're getting overwhelmed because they're like, oh my goodness, there's so much to do. And the very first worship fertilizer that I wrote dealt with that exact thing. One of my friends was rehabbing his bathroom, and he had started to take the old 1940s tile off the walls. And he's standing there in a pile of broken tile, we've gotten just like a chunk off of the wall. And he's like, this is too much work. This is too much. This is dumb. And he felt this thing come up in his spirit. Like the Lord was telling him, like, no, I'm calling you to this. You're in this now. I'm going to give you what you need to do it. Keep going. And which is very much like what you're describing. Like, oh, yeah, but you don't understand. Like this place is a mess. Like read your Bible. And read the stories of what leaders, my goodness, we have a lot of, in some ways, really scary precedent to follow in. But certainly, complaining isn't one of those, and opting out. I would tend to move too quickly. That would be one of the ways that I would sabotage the plan to move forward to help my team get with the program. Is I would just go too fast because I'm ready yesterday. Let's go. I'm ready to jump in. I'm ready to go right now. Let's do it. I'm not risk averse. I'm ready to take chances. I'm ready to do I love doing things that had never been done before. Put me in that spot. Let's make that happen. Let's go. I moved my family to Costa Rica, for goodness sakes. I waited 10 years to do it, but I learned a little. But I would make changes too quickly, and not feel like anybody could ever need more time to process or to get on board. They should just do that instantly. They don't have trouble with change because I don't have trouble with change. They don't have problems with risk because I don't have problems with risk. And like that could be where I would go because I don't think that way. So I'd go too fast. That would sabotage me.
Yeah, along with that is sort of related, but also different is isolation, like being the only one who either wants to change, feeling like you're the only one that wants to change, or everybody else isn't on board. So everybody else has the problem, like, I want to do this. I'm going to do this. I don't care what anybody says, but not having the shared responsibility and the buy-in from the team. Mm-hmm. And by the team, I don't necessarily mean just the worship team. It could be the leadership team. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of people work in an environment where their leaders are, say, I don't know anything about music, therefore I don't care about it. You just do it and make it work and don't ask me any questions. Don't get me involved. I got my own stuff to deal with. And that person is isolated and they're like, it's all me. Yeah. Instead of, this is what we are called to do.
Yes.
When you feel that the team is called, there's a shared responsibility of growth and we're all in it together, as opposed to like, it's my responsibility to move the needle on my own. And that's again, faulty thinking that we fall into, and it paralyzes us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it might be that is the case, on at least on the outside, where your pastor just says in more ways than one, just make it about Jesus. I don't care what you do. Just don't mess it up and make sure there's music on Sunday. But I bet that below the surface, there are things that we all agree to and we all are aiming for as a staff, as a church, that has to do with discipleship, and that's why I think it's so powerful to begin this kind of conversation about implementing change or getting your people on board with your program. Is like we talked about at the beginning. What is our program? At the function, it's about the gospel. It's about making disciples. It's about creating spaces where people can meet with Jesus. Like, that is what our church does. That's, if a church doesn't make disciples, the church isn't a church, right? Like that's what we are. And so my expression about that, my desire to have everybody come to a retreat, maybe that's my program, or to start a midweek rehearsal if we haven't had one, or to introduce to have more people join the team. Maybe that's my program that I'm trying to get. And and my drummer has been like the only drummer for 5 years, and he's really resistant to any other person playing his drums. Like, what's my program? Oh, my program is making disciples. And so part of that is helping him. Part of that is adding more people. Like, that's what we do, but that's why we do it. It's not that I don't like you as a drummer. It's not that I have these grand dreams of having, lots of rock and roll at my church, or a really big band, or, whatever people might be thinking. It's because I want to make disciples. It's because I'm called to make disciples. That's what we do as a church. And so we need more drummers, Anyway. But back to what Tony was saying, if you are in a place where it feels like you're the only person ringing this bell, then step back and say, okay, how far back, how deep do I have to go to find common ground with those around me? And can I ask some questions and find out, are we really on two separate pages here, or are we just looking at two sides of the same coin? And let's talk about this in different terms, so that I'm not alone. Because if you're alone, you're just not going to make it. I don't care how driven you are, how good of a leader you are, how passionate you are, like you will tank, you will burn out along a long enough timeline. That's just the way it is. It might come out in different ways. You'll express it differently, but you'll still tank. You'll still, yeah. And
I think good leaders are good at communicating the vision to their team and evaluating and reevaluating where they're at and where their progress is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that we lose sight of sometimes in the church, because we've been serving alongside the same people for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 5 years, and we've never really sat down and say, hey, do we still agree what we're all here for? Like, how did we do last year? Are we still on the path? And sometimes it's discouraging to do that. And sometimes we don't want to open ourselves up to saying, you said we were going to do this, but you never did it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, I guess you're right. I didn't.
Yeah.
But I think that, does everybody know why they're there on a Sunday? Does everybody know why we worship? Because everybody, I don't care who they are, get caught up in the minutia of survival, right? On every team, you've got people whose, kids are, struggling. Their parents are sick, and they just had to move in with them, and now they got to take care of their parents and their kids. Their car broke down, their job, didn't, let 5 people go and said, we're going to give all their work to you. Every person on that team has life struggles that they're working on. And, no, it's very rare that somebody joins a worship team thinking, how can I ruin this team and grind progress to a halt? I don't think people wake up and think that. Maybe they do, and that's scary in itself, But most people don't do that. It's everybody's just doing their thing. And sometimes it's like, hey, yeah, we're all in this life thing where we're trying to grow and progress and trying to convince ourselves of what we believe or what we say we believe. So how are we doing with that? Where are we at? Are we still on track? And sometimes we just need to remember, oh yeah, that's right. That's why I wake up at 6 a.m, so that I can come in early and be ready to serve my brothers and sisters and to point a spotlight to God. Okay, yeah, that's right.
Well, I like the words you used. I think you said, I lost sight of, or I lose sight of, and that is what vision, that's a vision statement. I lost sight of. I couldn't see the path anymore. I didn't remember why. Those are all verbs or expressions to say, I don't have any vision. I've lost the vision, and vision drifts, vision leaks. We always have to be continuing to call people back to this. This is what we're doing. We are making disciples. We are shining the spotlight on God. That's what we do. This is why we show up. Romans 12 calls us to love each other, genuinely, and to serve with all of our hearts. And there's in Scripture, there's lots of vision that we don't need to be a visionary to create our own thing. It's all there. And yes, there is space for specific expressions of vision. But yeah, we don't need to be big visionaries.
Dave, how do we call teams back to vision when it's so easy for us to assume that everybody knows all this. Everybody knows why we're here and what we're doing, and that we're here, for a certain specific purpose. But how do you, practically speaking, how do you call people back to the vision? instead of assuming that they're already there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first thing I want to do is remember that I lose the vision myself personally, right? And so how do I call myself back? What is it that lights me up, that calls me back to the core of what I'm doing? Share that with them. Because the second I think that, okay, you guys are going to think this is dumb, but like, no, like for me, what lights me up? I need to make sure that you're lit up too. I need to call myself back first, like preach to myself before I preach to my congregation, so to speak. So,
well, I think it's stop treating it like it's something abnormal. I mean, that's completely normal.
yeah.
The Bible exists for that purpose. Think of the epistles, where all of them were like, Paul writing to the church and saying, hey, don't forget about this. I noticed, that you guys are doing this. So-and-so is doing this. Don't forget about what we're doing here. God has called us to a higher thing. Like, that's the whole New Testament is that sense of like, don't lose the vision here. Don't lose the big picture. Don't forget the gospel. This is how it applies. And there was a lot of nuts and bolts things that he addressed with the Corinthians and the Galatians and the Ephesians, all this. I mean, that's what's there. So it's like, that's just part of life. Like we shouldn't I think it's weird to treat it like, I don't know if I should say this. I don't know if I should talk about this. What if Paul did that? What if he was like, I don't want to, step on any toes. Maybe it's okay that these people are doing crazy things and they're just, trying to do the best. I'm not going to get too caught up in the minutia. Like, he didn't do that. He's like, no, we have a higher calling here, and we're not going to stop talking about this. At no point will we ever stop talking about it. So the weird thing is that a lot of people never started talking about this stuff. And I think that's what you're saying, Kevin, is if you grow up in a church where they never started that conversation, you're not allowed to challenge anybody. You're not allowed to ask anybody, hey, how's your heart? How are you processing this? How's, how are you doing at work? How's things at home, and how are you holding up, buddy? Like, man, that's sad that we don't get to live I don't want to live in an environment like that. I don't want friends that aren't asking me how I'm dealing with life. And I don't want to be a friend that isn't asking my friends that, because that's just sad. Because we're all in it together, and we're all hurting. We all have troubles. We're all struggling. So how sad to not ask questions, to not, take temperature and see,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, to me, it's sad. And I do it myself because I get caught up in life. I always, I always make a lot of connections with marriage because I'm constantly evaluating, am I taking care of my wife? Am I taking care of my family? And often the answer is no. You're too busy trying to make money because you think that that's what's important to keep paying the rent. And it's not that it's not important. It's just not the most important. And if I'm not telling myself that, and if I'm not asking my wife how she's doing and how she's holding up, then I'm just sad. That's a sad story. I'm a sad husband. So let's not be sad leaders, and let's not be sad brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of the reasons that it's so important to have weekly rehearsals, because it allows you time to talk about stuff other than just get, burn through this music, it needs to be normal to talk about why you're doing what you're doing. And it's important to me, I'm not sure this is important for everybody, to say it in fresh ways, not just to say the same thing again and again, but just, like having specific verbiage is important, but saying it in different ways is important too, because it keeps it fresh, it keeps it alive, it keeps it new. And that might be where you're in your daily scripture reading and you see something and you're like, oh my goodness, this kind of is a different expression of our calling. I'm going to share this at rehearsal, or maybe it's like, hey, Sam, I know we all know this, but tell us why we do what we do, and then Sam can respond with either like a really insightful expression of that, or like you're like, oh, okay, I have some work to do. Now I see how they're seeing our worship ministry, and I'm going to create a little minister teaching for next week that addresses that helps them understand and grow in their knowledge of what we're actually called to. So get the kids involved again.
Yeah, I back when everything happened with COVID and we shut down and we started just streaming, we weren't doing weekly rehearsals. We were just going in on Sunday morning and, preparing right before we do the live stream. So we, we're getting away from our devotional time, our prayer time that we would do together as a team. We do that on our rehearsal night on Thursday night. So we had kind of, we weren't doing that. And so then when we started meeting again and started having rehearsals again, I wasn't like implementing it again. We'd always do our prayer time, but it's like the devotional kind of got, pushed aside. And so that's what I meant by time. Sometimes we just don't take the time to do what we need to do. And so a week ago, Friday, I was reading, studying the Kings, all the Kings and Second Kings, and studying Ahab and Jezebel, and just how Jezebel had the opportunity to be a good influence on her husband, and sadly, that's not what she chose to do. And she was a very bad influence on her husband. And it was, it was about how the study was about how, we all are influencers, either for the good or for the bad, either positively or negatively. And so that just really struck me, and it had me like really think like, what kind of an influencer am I, with my team that, God's entrusted to me. And so that Sunday morning before church, I took it and I shared that with them. And I was like, you know what, we haven't been doing this, but I know, we need to get back into making it a priority. And, I want to be, a good influencer, with you guys. I mean, God's, given me this calling to, and I'm your leader and I want to be, a good influencer. And then I just kind of related it to them too, that they're influencers as well, to each other on our team. They're either influencing them for the positive or for the negative. So, to kind of really think about how are they with being an influencer. And then even with our church family, we definitely are influencing them in good ways or bad ways. And so, so it was really good. And worship was awesome that day. And
That's cool.
That's great. I love that, Mindy, because we're called to live in community with each other. Like that was God's plan for the church. It was always community. It was always together, and iron sharpens iron. All those things. It's like, yes, a leader is keeping things in motion and driving the bus, and that. But there is an element of like, we need each other. We need each other to influence each other. Like, I need your influence on me when I get discouraged, and sometimes, sometimes that's like, hey, we haven't done this. We haven't prayed in rehearsal for a while. Why? Oh, good point. Let's reevaluate that. Or, I like that I love that you're living in community and you're encouraging them, like we're all influencers.
That's good. That's good. Well, let's close with that then, guys. It's a good way to end our time today.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, guys.
Good
Yeah.
seeing you, Kevin and Tony.
Okay, good to
Yeah.
see you.
Likewise.